Tēnā koutou katoa, na mihi nui kia koutou. It's wonderful to be able to introduce you to our leader, my leader of the National Party, Simon Bridges, today, having just last week done my introductory chat as a new member of this club. As you all know, Simon Bridges has been the leader of the National Party since February last year. He was born in Auckland. His mother was a primary school teacher. His father was a Baptist preacher. He was the youngest of 6. So I'm picking, if his mother treated him anything like I'm treating our fourth, our youngest child, then he was a very well-raised child. Possibly spoiled from time to time. I don't know, Simon. I'll leave you to reflect on that. He went to the University of Auckland, where he studied history, politics and law. He went on to Oxford, where he met his wife Natalie, and he worked as a Crown prosecutor in Tauranga for many years. He had become a young nat at the tender age of 16, so it was probably always in the stars that he would run for office, and he did so for the first time in 2008, where he beat a fairly well-known opponent by the name of Winston Peters. That, of course, the 2008 election, you'll recall, was the election where New Zealand First didn't quite make it back into Parliament. He went on, of course, as a member of the key government to be a very well-trusted and senior minister. His portfolios included consumer affairs, transport, climate change, energy and resources, economic development, and associate finance. So he had a number of those roles, and I was obviously a very senior member of the team. Today he lives in Tauranga with his wife Natalie, and they have 3 children. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Simon Bridges, leader of the National Party.
Well, thanks so much. It's great to be here. Can I just acknowledge Nicola? She does a wonderful job as a local member of Parliament, List MP, based here in Wellington. And look, for those of you who perhaps don't follow these things so closely, I think the consensus is very clear that Nicola's got an incredibly bright future. She's our early childhood education spokesperson, and I just think it's really hard in a way to think of a more important area, those first 1,000 days, when we do want to make sure we're investing and we're doing what's right there. And if I can say so, I think about the fees-free policy, which hasn't resulted in a single additional student at university or polytechs or wānanga. It'll be much better spent and invested in early childhood education. Can I say it's great to be at this august and prestigious club. I was going to say oldest, I'm told that's not what to say. The original, the originator of Rotary clubs in New Zealand, and the biggest, I'm told, as well. It's great to hear. Look, there's many of you that I know a little. Work with Marion. It's great to see Chris and others of you here today. As I say, that's great. Nicola's been sort of kind enough to run through my I suppose, plotted from birth CV. I like she's got in, I'm the son of a teacher and a preacher, and I'm the youngest of 6, so to answer your question, Nicola, I would say well-nurtured. My brothers and sisters would say spoiled, is sort of how they would see it. Self-assured is maybe another way of saying it. I grew up in West Auckland, where my father was a minister, so mother was a teacher. I worked hard. I was never the brightest guy in class, but I persisted and, look, at university did well. You've heard I went to Oxford, had a great experience there, did a BCL, they call it, Bachelor of Civil Law. And, as I told the kids at Karori Normal Primary this morning, I met my lovely wife Natalie there. She was doing romantic poetry, and Percy Bysshe Shelley, actually, there you go if you really want to know, and Ozymandias, I think it was. And we met very early on, and there's these old medieval quads, and our college had one of these quads, and there was the very narrow sort of cubbyhole area, and I brushed past Natalie, and we got talking, and we started going out not long after that. We got married at the end of that year. She went home that afternoon we first met, and she telephoned her mother. She said she'd met the most incredibly handsome Japanese man. So there you go. On Maori, by the way, in case you were... but back then with the dark glasses, that's sort of... So there you go. And that's that, as you said, we've got 3 children. I was a Crown prosecutor. I did very serious jury trials, the most serious stuff, the murders, the rapes, and so on. I actually got involved in politics. I've been a member of the National Party a very long time, very political. No one in my family was. I mean, my father, in a sense, probably a swinging / Labour Party voter. My mother, off a dairy farm, probably slightly the other way, more blue. But I just knew politics was important. It was about values. It was about what makes the world tick. And so I got involved in the National Party quite early. I may not have gone to Parliament, but I could just see in law you could do justice in one case, but you weren't really changing the rules of the game. And so I felt I wanted to get into Parliament and do that. And you've heard a bit about that. I actually wanted originally, for the lawyers in the room, I wanted to be Minister of Justice. I had burning desires to change the criminal justice system and do better for victims and the like. Actually, John Key had other ideas. I never have been Justice Minister, but I've been many other things besides. I enjoy it. I feel a deep sense of pride and passion to be a Member of Parliament, now to lead the biggest party in New Zealand's Parliament. And I thought I'd just sort of offer, I suppose, a few views on where things are at, where I see the government and its program and what we're up to, and I suppose the philosophical differences between the parties in Parliament. Look, in terms of the budget, my view is it failed to deliver on the promises that the government's had. And I look at it, and I'm very, for those of you who are in Wellington, and Wellington Central, I suspect it's slightly more of you than in other parts of New Zealand that follow politics. I look at it and I think what happened in Australia is very interesting. We've got the same phenomenon here. Now, I think when I look at their budget and their program and where they're going, there's really not a lot for middle New Zealand. For people who go to work, who earn 60, 70, 80 grand a year, there's no sense of a plan for the economy. In fact, to the extent that there is, it's more tax, it's more costs, it's more debt, and it's a weaker economy. And that's where we're focused. Some of you in this room probably worry or maybe even dislike the extent to which the National Party focuses very much on the economy. But the reason I do that is because I know fundamentally the economy is about people. And if you're not delivering a strong economy, you're just not going to do the things that turn the dial on that wonderful prayer we heard about helping those who most need it, in health and education and infrastructure and the like. So I didn't see, and I don't see, a plan for growth. Fundamentally, you've talked about tax. We've had several more. The first act of the government post the budget was to slap on $1.7 billion in petrol taxes. 4 cents and 4 cents. It's $1.7 billion over the life of this term, this current term. And that's a cost that middle New Zealand can't afford. It's ironic, actually, when you look at it, because the big projects in infrastructure and transport that I and others in National started, they've been stopped. And there's a pot of money accumulating, and as I say, there's more taxes there. The debt question's important. We've seen $5 billion more in debt come on the government's books in the last 6 months. And, you know, there's a trendy school of thought, dare I say it, probably very trendy amongst certain economists in Wellington, that that's a good thing, that actually, you know, the government should be using its balance sheet in those ways. I look at it though, actually it's taking GDP, public debt to GDP from 20-odd%, which was the promise Labor made to become the government, to 25%. That's an additional $17 billion over the next 3, 4, 5 years. I look at it and I remember as a fresh-faced young MP who weighed a bit less and didn't have children and could run around Oriental Parade a bit quicker than I can today, we in that first term, post-GFC or through the GFC, increased debt by $28 billion. because that's what you've got to do when there's an economic shock. And my concern is be a brave person who said right now in the world, we aren't going to have one. And suddenly debt actually won't be 25% of GDP, it'll be 30, 35%. And then suddenly, you know, you just haven't got the ability to do the stuff that New Zealanders, middle New Zealand, hard-working New Zealanders and their families sort of expect and deserve from a government. You know, Bill Clinton, actually it wasn't him, it was his advisor, a guy, James Carville, I think, said it's the economy, stupid. And the reality is, and I'll be blunt about it, the economy from the day Bill English left the beehive to today has fundamentally gone from 4% growth to 2% growth. I mean, if I want to be really 2.3% growth than we're at the moment. We'll have new figures out on Thursday that will give us a sense of the first 3 months of this year. And if you watch Parliament, and I won't be brave enough, I did at the last meeting, it's amazing how many people do watch Parliament, by the way. I think you should all get lives and do something more useful with your time. But if you watch Parliament, the debate between Jacinda and Ardern and I on the economy, it isn't that it's weakening, it's simply why. And her viewpoint is, well, the reason it's weakening is because of Brexit, China, US trade war, all these curly, hairy things going around around the world. The problem, it seems to me, with that theory of life is, yep, there are risks, there's no question about it, but our terms of trade were out, I think, a fortnight ago. They're as strong as they've ever been in New Zealand's history. In terms of our trading partners, primary produce, all of these areas, we are doing as well or better. So something domestically has slowed down in New Zealand. In my view, is it's straightforward. Ultimately, the small business owners I visit literally, I was going to say every day of the week, it's not true, but certainly every week of the year, they don't have the certainty and the confidence that they had. It's down. And the reason they don't have the certainty and the confidence is, look, you may think they're good policies, you may think they've got their place, but playing around with employment laws, mucking around with minimum wages, it's good for Peter over there, but it's not good for small businesses. It shrinks the gap between their costs and their profits. Overseas investment rules, dealing to oil and gas, saying we're not so keen on international students, all of these things, they accumulate. And businesses and business confidence, which is literally whether the retailer decides to get a new coffee machine or hire a new worker, they don't do those things. And that's where we're at right now, I think, in New Zealand, a situation where they've got their hands in their pockets. That then means, as I say, less ability to do the things that I think New Zealanders vote for governments on, like healthcare. I think it was great in the budget we saw more for mental health. It's a fantastic thing to do. But I think if you look at the numbers, it was the expense of more general health. I mean, health needs two things. It needs money poured in, because ultimately we are living longer, we have more wonder drugs, we have more ability with the right technologies and innovations to stay alive and to stay well. It needs that money. It's not getting it. The deficits are higher than they've been, but it also requires targets and measures, and we haven't got those. So the first time, literally in a decade, there are fewer elective surgeries this year happening than last year. And as I say, that hasn't happened in a decade. It's not that there's not cataract operations and hip operations and these things that are required. There are, but they are not being done at the volume that they need to be. We're not funding the cancer drugs. I think of a woman that I worked with, my first law job, and wonderful woman, got me out of trouble. She was the boss of HR, Peter. And I won't tell you the stories, they're not particularly edifying, but you know, wonderful woman, she's got stage 4 breast cancer. She's moved to Australia because she can't get that treatment here. And so when we're talking about wellness, these things are important. Education, it's good the strikes are over. We've got 18 reviews, I think, going on in that area right now. And crime, the figures are trending up. and that concerns me. What would I do differently? Well, I look at where the government's at. I think the number one priority has to inject confidence back. So ultimately, I would be saying to business the things they want to hear. I'd be thinking about those small businesses and their need for cost and tax relief to make sure that they are certain, that they are confident, and actually they do continue to reinvest in their business. And then I'd literally focus on 3, possibly 4 things, and not a lot else. And I'm sorry if some of you have been former military attaches or other such things, and you see other cases for funding, but it would be health, it would be education, and it would be infrastructure. And then after that, really, it'd be tax relief, meaningful tax relief to middle New Zealanders. So actually, when rents go up, when costs of living go up, they've got the ability to deal with that and to look after their families. I reckon there's 2 fundamental differences between the opposition and the government today. And the first one of them, actually really they both boil down to the same thing when I think about it. One is a view, and it's a valid view. And if it's your view, well, you know, as I say, it is a valid view. I happen to respectfully disagree with it. It's that the beehive and Parliament has the answers for most of the problems. That if you bring in the taxes and you dish it out, that is a way to deal with it. Economically, I just don't think that works. Hasn't worked throughout history, and it's not going to start working now. The economy is retailers, is kiwi fruit growers, is ICT businesses that aren't based in the beehive. It's the beehive has limited ability to give those answers. I think the other area that I know you'll be interested in, it's part of why you became members of Rotary. There's the fellowship, there's also the doing good and helping those who need that help. It is in that area of the social sector. And what I see is a very clear philosophical view from Jacinda Ardern, Grant Robertson, where they say that universal entitlements are an important way to lift people up, whether it's fees free, whether it's the winter energy payment, which maybe most of you I'm sure aren't old enough to get, but if you do, you know, good luck to you. I hope you spend it wisely. That's their belief in how to do things. My problem with that is actually it means that people who don't need it get the funding. And I believe that, you know, Bill English had it right. If we didn't, tragically for him, I suppose, in a sense, have enough time to do enough on it. But that's social investment, which literally means no more than getting in and targeting the money at those who most need it. You know, I think about a gang whānau that I met in Maryvale, Tauranga. I don't know how many of you are particularly familiar with Tauranga. Look, Maryvale in Tauranga is not Maryvale Christchurch, right? I mean, it's not the worst area in New Zealand, but it ain't the best. It's got a bunch of actually lovely old state houses. They look over the water. Their outlook is fantastic. But, you know, that was a whānau that I met through a variety of circumstances, and they've got complex drug, alcohol, and just ultimately long-term intergenerational dependency issues, right? More money isn't the answer for them. In fact, it probably makes things worse. What's required is people who know what they're doing, going in there over the long term and making sure they get the help they need. If it's a drug course, they get that. If it's nudging dad into work and kind of making sure he stays there, it's sort of that stuff. And if we weren't doing the big spray and walk away, I think we could sort of do that. I'll finish with this because Marion's standing up, which is a reasonably unsubtle cue to me, I must admit. We're not going to win the next election just because, look, we think the other lot, personally, you have your own view, sort of isn't up to it, doesn't have the competence or the ability to deliver. And that's why right now you've got an opposition party in National that's working harder, I think, than any year before. We are literally tuning out policy development. We've done it in the environment. We've done it in international affairs, and last week we put out a relatively comprehensive document in primary production, our views on food and the future of food. So we're hugely ambitious for New Zealand, and it's a great privilege, I think, to be involved in this great little country at this particular time. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. I just want to share two reflections because there are two things that Simon can't say about himself. The first is I'm one of the 55 people, all with a reasonable degree of ego, who form Simon's team. And as a leader, what I can tell you is that behind the scenes he's an incredibly collaborative leader who listens well and is able to sort out the odd piece of difference we have between us. And I've worked alongside a couple of Prime Ministers, and I can say that his ability to get the best out of others is extraordinary and something I very much value in him. The second reflection that I want to make is that when I look at Simon in the morning or on a Monday after a long weekend, I know that he and I are coming from a similar place, which is that we don't go home in the weekend and put our feet up and listen to music. He is running around after a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I imagine is up in the night as well. And he is very much a family man, a very dedicated father, and I think that comes through in his work. So thank you, Simon, for coming to address the Wellington Rotary Club. It's been a pleasure to have you with us.